Hi everyone, my name is Grace and welcome to the third podcast of Gracie, Kenyan Diaspora and Returnee. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're so glad that you're here. This podcast is a forum for discussing everything diaspora and life as a returnee. Today, I'm joined by my good friend Fwamba, who is a cross-border payments expert, and we shall be discussing diaspora remittances today. Hi Fwamba.
Hi, Grace. Thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast.
You are so welcome.
I'm happy to share some insights.
Thank you. All right, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what diaspora remittances mean?
Cool. Very interesting question. So I'll start with what diaspora remittances is and then dig into who I am. So diaspora remittances, defining remittances would be anyone sending money outside the country to their home country. So this could be someone living in the US sending money to Kenya. You could be living in Uganda sending money to Kenya. So as far as you're sending money back home, that is considered a remittance. How did I plug into remittances? I have experience for over 10 years. Started working from the banking side and then transitioned into the remittance side of the business. Remittance side of the business here being the money transfer companies, your Western Unions, MoneyGrams, and the like.
Right, cool, thank you. And there's been a lot of talk lately about diaspora remittances. We know that in 2021, Kenya actually reached their record high in remittances, and that seems to be increasing. So it's usually just people sending money back home either to support family members, meet their basic needs. Sometimes we know there are diaspora who are investing back home. And so that's some of the ways that they invest, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about anyone who's living outside the country, so you still have ties back home. So these ties could be you've left family. We look at the statistics that central bank published, and the average age for guys living in the diaspora is actually between 35 and 55. So a lot of these people are either married or have kids back home or have brothers and sisters, and there's always that tie, with your home country. So this could be anyone, like a brother sending money to a sibling back home, or it could be a daughter sending money back home to the mom, or even parents. Some parents relocate in search of work, which is what we see a lot with diasporans in Africa mainly. So you have a lot of people who are moving into or transitioning to Uganda, going to Uganda, Tanzania for work, and they still have children back home, right? And they'll be sending money back home for school fees, upkeep, and the like. So it's, as was defined, any person in the diaspora sending money back home, and it could cover so many things.
Cool. So according to World Bank, total remittances into the low and middle income families grew by 7.3% in 2021. They also reported that into sub-Saharan Africa, it grew by 4.2% in 2021. Obviously, COVID had an impact as the diaspora was sending money back home to support their family. And luckily for those that were in first world countries, they benefited from fiscal stimulus and employment programs. But what else has resulted in the increase in diaspora remittances into Kenya or Africa as a whole?
Okay. So maybe looking at the COVID effects, right? So right now is when we're feeling the COVID effects. But during COVID, at the height of it, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of movement. Even in Africa, mainly people accessing markets and all the lockdowns that were happening. So what that did for us as a continent is we pushed a lot of our people into the digital space, right? So you found instances where naturally or previously traders would accept cash. Now they were more comfortable accepting digital tokens, right? Digital tokens could be e-value in terms of a mobile wallet transaction or a bank transfer. And what that did is, in remittances, we look at it from two sides. So there's a sending push and the receiving push. Loosely translated to when you're sending, what factors or what available options do you have to send to a receiving country? And receiving, what are you more comfortable receiving in? So are you more comfortable receiving a remittance in cash or into your mobile wallet? So because on the receiving side, it was easier to transact with e-value or digital money, it was a natural fit for a lot of the players who are sitting in the country and receiving. What are you more comfortable receiving in? So are you more comfortable receiving a remittance in cash or into your mobile wallet? So because on the receiving side, it was easier to transact with e-value or digital money. It was easier to construct or to pay school fees, but then the money is being diverted to other means, right?
Yeah.
So what we're looking at in the next sort of wave of remittances is how do we transition to what we call purpose-based remittances. Purpose-based remittances here being targeted remittances to specific cause.
Yeah.
So can you sitting somewhere in Tanzania, sitting somewhere in the US, send money directly to a school to pay school fees? Or can you pay directly to a hospital for medical bills if it's regular checkup? Can you pay for insurance? If it's a trader who's constructing for you, or it's a merchant of some sort, can you pay directly to that merchant? So in essence, we cut out the middleman. We cut out the brother and the sister for remittance they are not the intended recipient, right? So these are some of the things that we're looking at in the next wave. How do we move remittances beyond just sending money to someone and giving it purpose?
Right.
Some banks have also started looking at how do we look at it even from a borrowing perspective. So how do you tie your remittances into how can we use your remittances as a credit scoring?
Yes.
And Grace can talk about that credit scoring mechanism. To allow you to get some form of credit. And really, that is what we're looking at in the next wave. We believe that these changes will probably start taking effect in the next maybe 2 to 3 years, and that will completely change the whole remittance landscape.
Yeah, that's true. And on the credit scoring, it's true. Usually the local customers are able to be scored because their salary naturally is being channeled into a bank account. But with Diaspora, they send money into a bank account when there's a use for it.
Right.
So maybe they have a Diaspora loan and they're making the payment. But what about all these other remittances that they are sending into the country? Can we somehow tie them and help us to score Diaspora customers? It will make even lending easier.
Correct.
Yeah, in banking, I know that we also get a lot of times where real estate agents who are selling property get money from Diaspora for payment of the property, and they are not able to track it. So it goes back to what you're saying about purpose remittances, so that it's easier to track on this side in banking.
Correct.
Yeah, so that will really help. I'm also looking forward to when the cost of remitting money from Europe and Asia will reduce. It's friendlier from North America, but not so much from Asia to here. Also within Africa, frankly, I think it's still quite high.
So the cost of remittances is a growing debate in the remittance field, and largely some of the things that drive up the cost of remittances is one, the demand for it, and two, just basic economics, demand and supply.
Yeah.
So if you have a few off-takers of the service, then obviously the service will be more expensive. Now that, together with, there are not that many incentives this part of the continent, specifically sub-Saharan Africa, from a regulatory standpoint that would bring down the cost of remittances. We would love to see, as a remittance practitioner, I'd love to see central banks taking an active role in reducing the cost of remittances. Because remember, at the end of the day, the remittance companies are businesses that are trying to run themselves.
Right.
So if the cost of running the business is too high, right, it will be very difficult for them to reduce the cost of the transaction. That said, the markets you're talking about, there needs to be a deliberate conversation globally, from the sending side to the receiving side, just having proper synergies to bring down the cost of remittances. And then, another bit that we don't talk about a lot is the cost of foreign exchange. Right? So the cost of foreign exchange, this part of the world, is on average higher than any other place in the world, right? And that also brings up the cost of remittances. That said, there are a lot of measures that are being put in place to ensure that the cost of remittances are low. A lot of policies coming into place, and we've seen great strides in the past 5 years. Even from organizations such as IFAD, the World Bank, that are playing a key role in reducing that cost. So maybe in the next 5 or so years, we should be at par, with the Mexicos and the Russias of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, as you were saying that, I also remembered that even within Africa, when we are remitting money, usually it's converted first to maybe USD and then to a local currency. So if I'm seated in Kenya and I'm sending money to Nigeria, I think it usually first converts to USD and then the currency on the other side. Is that right?
That is right. In fact, when you look at banking, so a lot of cross intra-Africa trade or cross-border trade um, within Africa is mainly, it's mainly for trade. It's not P2P. P2P here being person to person, right? And if you think of the best use case we like to use is a Kenyan buying African fabric from Ghana or from Nigeria, right, which is in the West, is in West Africa. So if they push a swift transfer for purchase of the goods, naturally you'd expect that money to leave Kenya and go directly to Ghana or Nigeria. But that's not the case. What happens is the trader in Kenya will give instructions to the bank. I want to buy X amount of garments from Nigeria. The instructions would come in. They would go to the bank's intermediary bank, say in the US or the UK, and then that then gets credited to the trader's account in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So the money actually leaves the continent to be received on the other side of the continent. And you can imagine how expensive that would be. I mean, you're looking at effectively maybe 3 currencies.
Yeah.
So the trader is dealing in Kenya shillings, so you convert the Kenya shillings to dollars, so there's an FX loss there, and from the dollars to Ghana cedi.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, we really need to rethink how we do business as a region. And as you said, that's part of the reason why remittances across Africa are very expensive.
Yeah. All right. Well, very interesting. What else would you like us or the diaspora to know about remittances and just how all that is going?
Right. So I think purpose-based remittances, as I said, is the next phase of remittances. We don't want to hear stories again of friends and family sending money back home and the money is diverted to other causes. So as speaking to you in the diaspora, I think do your research when it comes to the remittance companies that you will be using to send money back home. Look for options, right? Don't just be okay with the bare minimum, right? So if there's a partner who's able to give you payouts directly to a bank account, go for that partner. Sometimes cost is a factor to look at. However, you also need to look at the other side, which is what are you gaining more from you sending money, and what options do you have? And over and above that, Grace does a fantastic job running the diaspora side. I mean, if you can send money to yourself, to your bank account in Kenya, and then redistribute that money as and when you feel, I feel that would be a better way for you to manage your finances, right? So instead of sending your auntie money to send to your cousin money, why not either send directly to your cousin or send money to your bank account, and then through access to mobile banking or internet banking, you can just move that money around. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So as we conclude, yes, diaspora remittances have increased over the years. Even the transformation in the digital space and internet penetration has really helped. The costs are lower than they used to be, but they're not quite where they should be, at least as compared to, let's say, Southeast Asia, which is much cheaper than sending to Sub-Saharan Africa. So we hope that with regulation and more improvement in the space, it will improve. You've also talked about the diversion of funds when diaspora send money back home. It's also a very interesting topic that we will be discussing in our future podcasts about what happens when people invest back home, how successful they've been. So we are looking to hear your experiences, share them with us. And in terms of the reputable platforms that you can send money through that are registered in Kenya, we will also share that on our podcast and also on our social media channels. So please subscribe to us and you will have that information. And with that, Fwamba, I would like to conclude this podcast unless there's anything else you'd like to say.
No, thank you very much, Chris, for having me, and looking forward to interesting discussions in the future. And please subscribe to this podcast. We'll be happy.
All right. Thank you again all for joining, and have a great day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye.